permission to speak. Shadows hide you. I am listening. Our paths converge.
So good to see you.
Hail to you. Never lose hope.
Here for a chat.
I hear you. It has only begun. Fight on, friend.
Welcome to episode 482 of Concede, a Hearthstone podcast dedicated to making the competitive side of the game more accessible to you. It is Thursday, January 30th, 2025, in the evening. Coming to you from Nomergan, Ohio, it's me, Edelweiss. From North Rend, Massachusetts, we have Wicked Good.
Hi.
From Teldrassil, California, we have Megasa.
Hello.
And from all around the world, we have you, dear listeners. This week's episode is brought to you by our producers, Number Theory, Crash, Beef Squatch, David P., Waloo, Jeremy T., Bottle Caps, Grumpy Monk, The Burger Club, Kirk Regan, Grizzly Bear, May, SSJ5 Goku, and NY Kiwi. And by our patrons of the week, Windrunner and Chico Carvalho. You can go to patreon.com/coinconcede to get perks like a thank you at the top of the show, early access to new episodes, one-on-one coaching sessions, and help support the show in the process. If you would like to support the show but cannot do so monetarily, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast feed of choice, as it always helps other people find the show. So, Life and Ladder, I would say, made questionable life decisions, but really it's like I have gotten caught up in what I refer to as the spiral. This was much worse when I used to play League of Legends, because those games last a long time. But basically, it's like you get in a headspace where you just like, you keep having to play one more game. Obviously, it's really bad when you're losing, because as we've discussed, you keep losing a lot of times, and you know but sometimes it can happen if you're winning, because you just like are riding that thrill, right? And you just want to keep going. And sometimes it's like when you're going back and forth, because it's like you lose a game and want to play again to end on a win, and you win a game and then just like want to catch that high again, and it just keeps going. And I feel like the combination of, I really like the mini set cards and all the new stuff to do with them, but that then has meant that I've climbed to like very high ranks. I've fallen somewhat now. I'm in like the 600s. But for a while, I was in like 300. I was in striking range of my personal best, which is the most dangerous place for me to be health-wise, because I'm just like, but what if I could do it? What if I could beat my personal best of like 260? Now, I don't even think I actually ended a month at 260. I just know that's like the highest rank I've ever been, is somewhere around there. I think that was playing like Odd Rogue. And yeah, it's just been the mix of like wanting to try different things and being in that striking range of my personal best, where I've just been like torn between the ambition and innovation of it all, and getting really frustrated because some of the decks that you lose to in this meta just, it feels really, really bad. I mean, we'll talk about that more, but yeah, Fizzle stuff and Dungar and Weapon Rogue, right? It's just like, ugh.
Yeah, Wicked was pointing out before the show, and you can speak more to this, Wicked, but a lot of, like, even the newer decks that are using it, a lot of the cards that are feeling bad right now are old last year's cards, like Fizzle, like, you know, Dungar is this year, but the Titans, like Yogg and Anar, are last year. Titan Force Traps is last year, which, Wicked, you had mentioned you got like 4 Titan Force Traps in a game.
Yeah.
You were not pleased?
Yeah. That was me making the mistake of queuing a game at lunch, and I thought I was going to be late getting back. We're back. We're kind of back to when I picked up Eternal, because I couldn't queue a game on the train station platform because the games took 30 minutes when half the decks had the original Rexar hero power from Knights of the Frozen Throne in it, and every game went past fatigue. Yeah, and I think I mean, I guess we're gonna add the hero power creatures, the hero power minions from Druid to that list now too, that are also
Yeah.
showing up all of a sudden.
Which I admit I played a bunch of that, and I do like that deck. It is kind of cool. It's counterintuitive that it works the way it does, where it buffs when you're Artanis, your hero power, like your hero's attack is buffed, and then you also extra buff the minion.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, this is a cool new thing, and then you're like, okay, but we have seen this before, particularly when it evolved into the dragon version.
Oh yeah, that happened today, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so for people who haven't seen it, I don't know that Banter came up with it, but McBanterface definitely popularized a hero power druid that also uses the dragon package, because that gives you, I mean, I think it is like a more sporting deck in that it actually plays minions instead of just mind control tech.
Sure.
And it's like, well, free taunts are still good. Splish Splash Whelp is still good. If you have some of a board in the early game, you don't have to have as many clears, but you still run Swipe, and you have Chia Drake for draw, but then it's also spell damage. So let's run Incendious, because why not? And also Fi with a buffed hero power from Artanis on her.
And Divine Shield.
And Divine Shield.
Good.
And Lifesteal. And she's free. Yeah. So
Usually not free, but cheap enough.
that's true. Usually not free.
You're not paying MSRP for Fi ever. So yeah, I mean, she's close enough to free.
When I would sync her when I was playing Zarimi Priest and seeing Dragon Druid on the other side often, she was always free for me because I had played 8 dragons.
Well, I think you're an outlier in that case. I don't think everyone's quite playing as many dragons as you are, but even that deck isn't. But yeah. I mean, it's like, I think that's kind of the problem, is that it feels like we're doing new things, but then the new things are just like, this is a more degenerate way to do a lot of the old things outside of like the Zerg decks, which have really kind of fallen off. It's a lot of, how do we do Starcrafty things with the broken cards that we had from last year? And I think that's kind of when I'm frustrated with this meta. I think I'm taking a little bit of solace in that it is, we are getting rotation in like a month or two, and that should shake things up considerably, because some of these cards are just so ubiquitous and we've just seen them so much that it'll be good to see what this meta is like when we don't have those in the meta.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame, because I wish we could see what some of these cards are like in, post rotation, but without new cards, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah,
it doesn't function because that's like 3 sets, right? Like,
it could be an interesting event, though.
I guess it could work because mini sets exist, right? Like when we didn't have mini sets, it would just be like way too few cards. But with mini sets, and this one being the biggest mini set ever, like you've got 4 sets plus 4 mini sets, one of them being larger. I want to see how some of the things shine, losing the old stuff, but not having a new set yet. Like, I always wish rotation came rather than the Franken meta. I wish it was like, okay, and rotation happens and you'll have an expansion in a week or 2.
Yeah, that would actually be interesting. Magic Arena used to do that around the time of rotation, where they just have like next year's standard whatever next year is, and they just run all those sets that hadn't come out, like just the sets that were still going to be in standard without the stuff that was rotating. And that was always an interesting format too. That would be, I mean, we kind of got a taste of that with the Great Dark Beyond pre-release, where we didn't have last year's cards, and like that meta felt really good. I mean, we also only had it for a week, so It was not enough time for it to get old. But it was an interesting meta, and it felt fresh in a way that, like, not that this doesn't feel fresh. Like, they did a really good job with this mini set in that it's these decks feel different, but until they started to not. And I mean, they still feel different than what we had before because there is still a lot of Starcraft flavor in at least some of them. I mean, obviously Dungar Druid is what it is. But you know, there is a fair amount of Starcraft flavor in these. But yeah, I mean, even like the Protoss stuff is pretty much pushed out of the meta. The Zerg stuff is starting to get pushed out of the meta.
I mean, you know, we still have both Zerg Death Knight and Location Warlock in tier 2. So, but it's not. I mean, I think we would also be annoyed if Zerg DK was as dominant still as it was last week when we were talking. But, you know, Terran Shaman, it is a Shaman deck. It's still got like Backstage Bouncer in it if you're playing the aggro version. It's got Fizzle, and we'll talk about that in the Infinite version. But it's also got a significant number of new cards. I mean, it's really leaned into the Terran synergies.
Yeah, I mean, if it didn't have Fizzle, it would be fine. It would not feel quite as oppressive, I don't think. I think it's the fact that it's going Infinite with Fizzle that makes it feel a little bit grindy. I think if that wasn't there, it would feel a lot better.
Yeah, for people who are enjoying it, it feels pretty new for them. I think for people who are not enjoying facing it, I certainly am more at the Siege Tank version. Goku here is pointing out there is also a Zerg Discover Hunter that's less popular but totally respectable to play.
Yeah, I messed around with that some because I was desperately trying to avoid the Infinite Shaman and Grunter Hunter because Grunter Hunter just doesn't super appeal to me. I find oftentimes that decks that I despise facing, I also am not interested in playing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't I don't know exactly why that is.
I mean, you can just be sick of a mechanic too, right? Like it doesn't mean that you're only like, that doesn't necessarily make it fun when you're playing it, right? It can be just as, it's valid for you to not like playing against something, but also not really enjoy that's just a play pattern in general.
Right. Like the Shaman is something actually, it's one of those where it should appeal to me, but I have been facing it so much that I'm just like, I don't want mirrors. I do not want. And particularly with the Infinite version, good lord. At least with the Tempo one, you know, they'll be over fast. Those mirrors don't sound so bad. But I played one mirror with the Infinite Shaman. And I was just like, I won that game and I don't feel good. Part of it as well is there is element of just like, did you roll well on your starships?
Yeah.
Because if you rolled 3 medevacs, get wrecked, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's both something that some people like about the deck and a thing that's frustrating about the deck, and that's amplified in the mirror, is that luck of like, what starship did you roll? Because it does lead to some differences between the games, and you have to adapt to what you got to some extent, which adds a dimension. But also sometimes you just lose the mirror because you rolled 3 medevacs. Yeah. And they do.
There was a Reddit post from Zeddy that, and I don't often quote Zeddy, but that was pointing out that this is the first set or mini set in as long as, I mean, he said in a while, I don't remember if he said exactly how long, but it's as long as I can remember, with 0 discover, which is,
what do you mean?
Like 0 cards with the word with the keyword discover on them.
That's not true. There's a Discover Hunter. What?
No. In Starcraft.
Oh, that were just printed.
Yeah, that were just printed. Like, this is the only mini set or you know, any release, whatever, that doesn't have any discover on it. And I think that it actually does make it a little bit more interesting. I mean, obviously you can't really do discover with the sets of, I mean, because what you would do is discover Protoss or Zerg or Terran, and it would just be like you get the same cards every time. So they can't really do that. But
Yeah.
also, like, no discover of anything else. And I think that really is an interesting, I don't know if it makes it better or worse, but it does make it feel a little different that there's a lot less discover in this meta.
Yeah, I was in Leo's chat and talking about how much I hate medevac. I mean, look, all the theming is on point, like 10 out of 10. But I mean, I was coming off multiple games of rolling like 3 medevacs in a row. So
yeah, it is ironic that medevac gives you heartburn, but yes.
But I talked about like, I wish there was like some way you could just like veto an option. Like full on discover, definitely too strong, right? There's only like 5 options to begin with in the first place, so you would just always pick damage or armor or whatever you needed in that moment. But and with limited choices, I suppose being like shown 2 would still be too strong. But I almost wish it was just like, and there's no way they would do this, but it shows you like this is what you're gonna get. Do you want something else? Yes, and then it rolls from the remaining. Right?
Like the re-rolls that they have in BGs now.
Exactly. Just give me a re-roll so I can be like, no medevac, please. No thank you.
That would actually be an interesting strategy, because if it's something that's fine, but it's not as good as it could be, do you risk the medevac or to try to get something better? Like there would actually, but it would be too slow, I think.
And the medevac is much better in the tempo version, right? Because like you can get a full board, right?
You can get a full board. You can bloodlust it. You can make weapon rogues cry, which I did a lot of.
I mean, that's always good.
So frequently, I feel like what you want is like 3 keywords, then you have those die. You've got missile pod for 1 damage to everything, so you're likely to roll poison with all those extra keywords.
Yeah.
And then you just want banshees.
Sometimes you want armor.
Yeah, sometimes
especially if your
sure.
if your Arcanite defense crystal got poofed, then.
But if you're the aggro one, you don't really.
Oh yeah, if you're the aggro one, you don't care about armor. You just want them to explode. So yeah.
Yeah, if you're the aggro one, then you're just like, why did I roll armor? I mean, every once in a while, I did have one game versus a weapon rogue with the fast Terran Shaman where I did not get a super fast start. I kept rolling Vipers, which is the armor one. But I had all the taunt in the world. And so I just ran them out of stuff and then won. Because I didn't get enough damage. But I had some armor, and I had bouncers, and I had little frogs, and I had medevacs, and then I got them again, and they didn't use their defens maybe in the best way that they could have. But, and they only have 2 anyway. So I could see them getting just like increasingly frustrated. And then they don't actually have infinite charges on their weapon. And they kept having to use charges to clear taunts. And then they have no healing. So most of the time, though, when you see a weapon rogue, you're just racing them, and you are faster on average than they are, which is very satisfying.
And I would imagine as the other shaman, you just get a gazillion armor and just outlast them.
I think you still try to kill them back.
You also get taunt. You do get taunts too.
Well, no, I think it's probably trickier with the slower shaman, but
I guess it depends on what you roll.
Like, yeah, I mean, they can have the deafen for the Arcanite defense crystal. You can not roll Vikings, and they do have ways of clearing like the pop-up book taunts. So I could see times where they just roll over you. But yeah, it is that element of like, well, you have to get lucky on the starships.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, other than Terran Shaman, which was a good way to come back to Hearthstone, because at least the timing was good podcast-wise, and then I didn't have to miss a week. But I've spent the entirety between last podcast and this podcast sick with the flu. So that was not fun. I had sort of ADHD, missed getting my flu shot, because I just didn't get around to it. My husband did get his flu shot. I got really sick. He barely got sick. Take from that what you will. My other PSA is backup files on your computer before you mess with them. It turns out I hadn't deleted a whole big folder of game saves, but they all went hidden for some reason that I never figured out. And then I had to use the terminal to unhide them. And I was like, what do people do who don't know how to use the terminal? And Google how to use the terminal.
They go to the Apple store, or they call their grandson, one or the other.
So just make a copy of the folder and put it somewhere else, and then mess with it. And then lastly, what I'm doing, Leo, aka Minty Fresh, aka Mint Condition, aka the lead designer of this set and the mini set, has been having some fun streams with various other designers or people on the team with him. So I saw his with Cora, I saw the one with Gallon. He had Hat on yesterday. That one featured our very own Edelweiss on the Warlock, the Zerg Warlock. And even though you were doing really, really well, but they might well have won anyway, except you had both consumes. Hat was like, okay, we're in good shape if she doesn't have consume. And then you played consume. And then he's like, I did it again. I said the worst thing and it happened. Because he had just done that in the previous game. Then like a few turns later, okay, as long as she doesn't have a second consume. And then immediately you play the second consume.
See, that's just rookie stuff. Is what that is. From see, this is the problem, is that he hasn't streamed in a while. Because as soon as you start streaming, this happens every time one of us does a co-op. We learn that in the first 5 minutes of the stream. Oh yeah, we need to stop speaking things into the universe. Because they immediately come to be.
Unless it's a good thing.
Yeah, that's just
and then
science.
It's a trolling clip.
Yeah.
It is science. There was, though, so Leo and Hat were kind of losing their minds over Edel's lethal. She did a ton of stuff and got them down to 3 with like ultralists and stuff like that. And they probably would have lost anyway if you'd ended the turn there. There was a Horizon's Edge out that was closed. And no way to kill another minion, except there was a Dark Marrow out, and Edel had 1 mana left, so she plays the Snake Oil Salesman, and it dies because of Dark Marrow, which opens the Horizon's Edge, which does 3 damage for exact lethal. Hat and Leo were like, what?
It took me a minute to see that, and I was like, oh. that text that often is not relevant.
Yeah. I mean, Dark Marrow is usually a 4 mana 4/4 most of the time anyway. So
yeah, I mean, it had been used to get because what I hadn't realized until I saw it happen in that game was that it also doubles the death rattle of the location.
It sure does.
2 8/8 rushers.
Oh,
so
yeah,
that's why it's in the deck.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, it's in the deck because that's how you get Horizon's Edge.
Yeah, because you need that for Death Knight cards. Like, that's why I say it's usually a vanilla 4 mana 4/4, because not actually doing anything aside from getting the Death Knight cards into play. But
yeah, I made a more aggressive version of the lands Zerg Warlock, where instead of having like Sargeras and Ceaseless and that stuff, I put in like the Reborn thing, Eliza and Buccaneer is what I mean by the Reborn thing. Yeah, but Buccaneer, Eliza, Dreadhound Handler, right? So you got some of that stuff. Snake Oil Salesman, like you mentioned, that goes pretty well with Horizon's Edge. And then, yeah, you've got Seaside Giant. I think in that game I was running Sea Giant as well. I ended up swapping those for Red Giant, which has been better than I expected. I feel like
we have to remind people what Red Giant is.
It is an 8 mana 8/8 with a beautiful signature art that's totally not part of why I put those in. But every time you play a card next to it, it reduces permanently, right? So it's not like you have to play 8 cards in a turn. And I've just found that I can often position things in the hand where, like, okay, maybe I can't get it out super early, but I don't have to have this fiddly yo-yoing of like, okay, when's the board the right size between theirs and my board is often filled with location stuff, which limits like how much I can take advantage of Sea Giant. I think it's probably like it is worse specifically against Zerg DK because they go wide and don't have too much in the way of locations because the spawning pool goes away quickly. But other than that, Red Giant felt pretty good because I could just kind of sequence things correctly to maximize reduction and then eventually have a cheap or free 8/8 to go with Forge. Very occasionally, you can just like get the right stuff next to it and do the old like turn 4 giant, but most of the time it's just like I'm quietly discounting this thing while I'm doing the other ways of making 8/8s and like fighting for board. And then it's the refill that I can do where I can like play it on the same turn as Forge or something.
I think you must have switched to Red Giant like immediately after that game because very shortly after that, someone posted in the Discord, well, I just ran into Edel and she was playing Red Giants. And I had to be like, ask
what's
the
Red
bot,
Giant?
what is Red Giant?
People just are like, a wild Edelweiss has appeared and is playing something weird.
She's just put custom cards into the client somehow, and we don't know how she does it.
Yeah, and then I started facing just all the infinite shamans, and it was not fun.
I mean, that was my Monday night, because like I was streaming Monday night, and I ended up bailing and going to Arena about halfway through my stream, just because it was like 3 or 4 druids in a row, followed by 4 or 5 shamans in a row, and it was just like I wasn't losing. Like it wasn't like I was losing every game. Like I had like a reasonable 50% win rate, but also I was at least what I feel like is on the edge of 11x. Whenever I'm in a 4-digit rank, I feel like I'm at the edge of 11x. Like we were talking today about whether I really am or not, because I'm at around 1300, and Magace is like, you can probably drop to about 2000 and still get in. And I'm like, but I don't want to test that theory with fewer legends this month. But also it's just like, if I'm in 4-digit territory, I'm just not feeling comfortable with it. So like every game matters a little bit more, and I get in my own head. It doesn't help that like during the week, I'm so cooked from going into the office that I don't feel like I'm able to play at that level. And like, I don't want to be risking my rank when I know I'm not playing well. So I haven't played a lot this week, but I've been staying in that range. But I was playing the Zerg DK. It was going fine, but it was just like, those games take forever and they're just kind of samey, and I kind of got tired of it. I played some stuff in casual, like outside, just to test some stuff out. Like I played a little more Protoss Priest. I played both of the shamans that we're going to talk about, like more in casual, which is not great for doing matchups, but at least it's giving a flavor for the deck. And then I'll be able to, like, once the month rolls, I'll feel a little bit better about it. I also did finish Dragon Age Veilguard this week on the train, and that game is amazing, and it's $25 right now, by the way, at least on Amazon, which is a little bit bittersweet because they also laid off like most of that studio yesterday, because of course they did. Yeah, but the game is fantastic, and by the way, if you haven't played the other Dragon Ages, neither have I, and it didn't matter. Like I bounced off of Inquisition a couple times. I might go back and try to play Inquisition now, but it kind of set up the stakes from the beginning, and it was like, I'm sure there's stuff that I would have picked up on if I played the other games, but it didn't really matter. Like it still felt like a fulfilling story, like standalone. So it's a good game and you should play it. But Hearthstone is also a good game, and we've been talking about just vibes for half an hour, so we should probably talk about the news and then talk about the Shaman decks that we've also already talked about for half an hour, but talk about those more formally. So let's do that.
Gadgets and Gazette always gets the scoop.
So not a ton of news this week, but a couple things that are of note. Right after we recorded on Friday of last week, we got patch 31.4.1, which addressed a number of the known issues that we talked about during the news last week. Specifically the bug where Inventor Boom could fail to resurrect a battlecruiser if battlecruisers that cost 5 or more mana and battlecruisers that cost less than 5 mana have died. And if you've had multiple battlecruisers that cost 5 or more die, you still will only resurrect one of them. That's not a bug, that's a feature. We talked about the hero power druid, and the reason that hero power druid took a little bit to show up is that there was a bug where Artanis's Twin Blades hero power wasn't buffed by Groovy Cat. They fixed that. Now hero power druid is a thing. It's a functional change, but the text on the hero power won't update, but it will. When you press the button, you'll get the attack, but it's not going to look like it when you hover over the hero power. So just be aware of that. And they fixed the bug where starships relaunched by Raynor did not show their per piece enchantments on hovers. That's like the little ribbon underneath the card. So that's fixed. And then in Wild, Mage Protoss decks could discover spells from other classes. Every so often, I get a bug like, how the hell did that happen? I would love to know. But, that's a thing that happened. There's also a bug where if you didn't play any Twist for the season in January or for January, but your highest rank was your carryover Twist rating, you weren't getting the right ranked rewards. So like if you got, let's say you got Legend in Twist in December and you only got like 8x in Standard, you should have gotten the chest for Legend, but you got the chest for Standard. I imagine that probably didn't happen that much given how few people were playing Twist, but it's a thing that happened. So they did one pass already to grant replacement rewards. They'll be doing another pass after this patch is live. And so if you haven't gotten that, hold tight, you'll get your rewards. It's coming. We also have a minor shop update. No new portraits, because there were a whole bunch that came out with the mini set last week, but we did get a couple that are returning into the shop. So Jade Serpent Thrall for Shaman and Lunar Deathwing for Warrior are both purchasable with $6.99 USD or 1,000 gold. So if you still have some gold left over and you're not hoarding it for the next expansion, you can go get one of those other portraits. There were a few others that I don't remember if we talked about them or not that got added to the shop too. So there's a bunch of options if you want to use your gold to purchase some portraits. And that's it. That's the news, because we got all the news last week. So not so much news this week, but yeah, we got a Shaman deck, or two Shaman decks really, to talk about. So why don't we do that?
All right. So we already started talking about this, but we wanted to talk some about Terran Shaman because that is really two of the more successful and newer decks in the format. So we were going to start by kind of, at this point, wrapping up our discussion about the Infinite Fizzle Terran Shaman. And then we will talk about the Siege Tank Aggro Terran Shaman, which of course is what I've been playing more. We did also, I crowdsourced a bunch of advice from our Discord server on the Infinite one, especially because we had played it somewhat less. Although I think Edelweiss and Wicked had faced it plenty.
Yeah. And you play it a couple times and you kind of get the idea. It's, it's pretty, it's fairly straightforward when you start playing it, but it can be a little bit intimidating because whenever you have Fizzle, it's like, well, what do I want in the hand? And you really do want to pare the hand down a lot for Fizzle if you are planning on going Infinite, which you don't always have to. You make a lot of armor just with the starships, like without having to recur them. You can make a lot of them, but the way that this Fizzle goes Infinite, normally it's Zola, but Shaman doesn't care about actually getting more Fizzles. It only cares about getting more snapshots. So that's why you have Triangulate. So then you can shuffle start more snapshots into the deck with the Triangulate. You can also, you run Incendious, and that's your win con. So you also can use that to shuffle more Eruptions if you don't need to go Infinite.
Incendious, I would say, is probably a Plan B win con, where Raynor is a Plan A win con plus Ceaseless.
Yeah.
And also, just to be really, like, with the Fizzle, the one thing that must be in your snapshot is a Triangulate if you want to go Infinite.
Yeah.
Right.
But then you could have some combination of, like, Ceaseless and Raynor, or, like, Ceaseless and Incendious, or, like, maybe, like, a Shudder mini. Not much more than that.
You probably want the mini from the Shutter Block over the real Shutter Block, just because it's a lot less mana. But I mean, even if you don't have time to do it, it's not the end of the world. Sometimes Shutter Block can be a little bit hard to get down, but
yeah. Unlike with the Fizzle Zola stuff, right? You don't get to remake your snapshot. So once you've done it, that's what's in there. Because you're triangulating, that same snapshot every time. So that's where, if you can sort of parse it down to be just the mini of Shutterwalk, sometimes you get the Incendious in there. A lot of times it's just like Rainer, Ceaseless are the big ones, because you can have infinite clears, and Rainer is kind of infinite all the things, right? It's your plan A because it often is armor and a clear and a board and like just all the stuff, and possibly face damage. But if it's not face damage and you do need a way to win, that's like where Insidious can come in as the backup, right? But there can be, although you have to get a bit lucky and actually be faster, there can be times where you just sort of go, well, I had Shutter Block, and then I played Insidious, and I guess that's what we're doing now. And you maybe triangulate the eruptions then. But I will say let's play this deck, run into a mirror. They went hard on that plan and didn't quite get lucky enough, and I was meanwhile just turboing starship things and had enough armor on my starship that my playing a bunch of Rainers outpaced their drawing eruptions. And eventually I flipped it around, which is just because Rainer's doing more things, right? It's gaining me armor while it's doing some damage and clearing boards, etc. They had really focused on doing the eruptions thing to the exclusion of spending mana on, and maybe they just hadn't drawn them yet. I don't know, but
I mean, you don't really turbo draw your deck, right? So sometimes it's just a matter of what you end up with early.
And there is a lot of draw.
You can, but you don't always, is what I'm saying.
And the version I was playing had no lock-ons in place of 2 gold panners, right? So more turbo draw, and then -1 triangulate. So you really have to triangulate for the photograph. And ran Grifta, right? So Grifta gives you just that little extra bit of versatility, right? Where you can, I made them burn a card for one, but you can get some healing. You can get the steal one is very good right now, right? Particularly if you can steal a key starship piece. I mean, that's insane, right? But you're like, oh, let me steal your Banshee and then kill it on my side. That's actually huge.
But just be aware that you're giving them a steal also when you do that. So you want to make sure that you don't have a giant minion on board that they can trade your starship into with one attack, right? That'll kill it.
Yeah. There's a lot of weird stuff that can happen with
the hand discount's not bad in this deck either, because you just have a lot of stuff that you're generally trying to dump anyway. And being able to I gotten a hand discount off of Grifta with both full size Shutter Block and Insidious in my hand, so I was able to just go Shutter Block Insidious on the same turn. Mm-hmm. And I'd had that in my because I didn't have the time to play the Shutter Block, but it wasn't as bad having both of those in the snapshot, because I could just dump both of them.
I mean, if you manage to get the discount first and then snapshot, the discount will be in the snapshot, which is great.
Yeah. That's also very good.
Yeah. That's kind of a very specific situation. But so here, we'll put those notes in the show notes, but I had just put the Vicious Syndicate list from today. But the core, 27, 28 cards is pretty agreed upon, I would say. Some people are hard running Hex instead of Thrall's Gift. Depends on whether you want that flexibility or not. It's mostly being used for Hex.
For the mirror.
Sometimes you need a Lightning Storm. right? Like there are go wide decks still in the meta. Like there are times when a lightning storm is not a terrible thing to have available to you. Bloodlust is not something you're doing particularly often in this deck, but you could, if you, especially that's one way to turn Medivacs into lemonade, is if you have access to I mean, that actually sounds kind of disgusting when I say it that way, but but I mean, if you have a bunch of 2/2s and the 2/2s live, you can turn those into face damage, and that can sometimes end the game, but that's not the way you want things to be going. But yeah, I mean, it's in general, I think what you're trying, it's kind of like Overheal Priest in a way, where you're kind of figuring out what you want a million of. Like, do you want a million Rainers or do you want a million Incendiuses? Right? Is it Incendiuses, Incendii? I don't know. We're not doing the plural thing again, but but you kind of need to figure out, like, what do you want a million of, and then plan for that, because you do want your hand to be small. So you want to not have it clogged with too much expensive stuff that you're going to just get more of, because then you're just going to run out of room in your hand. And also, one other thing to keep in mind, there's a temptation to hold off on, especially if you've already played an Incendius and a Triangulate. There's a temptation to sometimes hold off on or not a Triangulate and a Fizzle. There is a temptation to hold off on drawing the snapshot so you can draw some of the eruptions, but you kind of want to get the snapshot into your hand ASAP, because if you draw it naturally, then you can't triangulate it anymore and you can't go infinite. So you do kind of need to rip the Triangulate pretty soon after you fizzle, ideally even the same turn.
Yeah, same turn is safest.
Yeah, to make sure that you don't accidentally draw it, and then because once you draw it, you're not going infinite anymore.
Yeah, I mean, once you've triangulated it, then you have more in your deck, but that first one is really important. Alteris in our chat is pointing out Bloodlust can also give your Needle Rocks or Frogs attack to get them off the board, and can represent surprise lethals. And now that Vicious Syndicate put Thrall's Gift instead of Hex in their list, people will be expecting that maybe there's a Bloodlust for good and ill. They might be playing around it when they shouldn't be, but also it won't be as big a surprise, maybe. But it's easy to forget. If you're used to playing around Hex, it's easy to forget that Hex is also a Bloodlust. So I could see opponents pretty easily missing that. We had been sort of joking around that this deck, so if you enjoy this deck, then your Doctor Strange, when he goes, Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain. You cannot do this forever. Actually, I can. This is how things are now. You and me trapped in this moment endlessly.
See, but that's how the person playing the Shaman deck perceives the deck. If you're on the opposite side, it seems a little bit more like this.
The song that doesn't end. Yes, it goes on and on, my friend. That's enough, guys. Some people started singing it, not knowing what it was, and they'll continue singing it forever just because this is the song that doesn't end.
Sorry, not sorry.
I'm sorry on his behalf.
I will, if it makes you feel any better, I did set up that clip about an hour before the show, and that song has been bouncing around my head for the past hour, so I have been paying for that. Just probably not steep enough of a price, but it is what it is. I'm a priest main. I'm immune to suffering anyway. But yeah, it's the mirrors you need to be prepared to play the mirrors, especially given how many people are playing this deck. If you are going to queue this, you need to be prepared that you're going to have to play the mirrors, and the mirrors are going to take you a minute. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't play it. Playing a slow deck is not necessarily a bad thing to climb with. I know I say that. I know I sound like a broken record whenever we talk about climbing with a control deck. If you can get a good enough win rate, it is just as good as playing an aggro deck that you're losing. You're playing more games, but you have a lower win rate with. But every game that you lose hurts your win rate that much more, because you just have fewer games, and the games take a long time. Even when you're not playing against another Shaman, it can take a while. Like I think I had like 20-minute games when I was playing as the Zerg DK, which is not a slow deck.
Yeah, and I would say if you are facing this, like me, do not be like me and just get caught up in, oh, well, I can clear this and I can push some more damage. Just like try and take a step back, do the math. Like, okay, how much armor are they gaining per starship? Can you beat that
Yeah.
every turn?
Yeah.
Like, clearing your board and making a big minion. And if the answer is no, then just concede and save yourself time. It feels bad when you're like, you can see sort of the steps you can take to get one more turn or to like take over. But the fact is just if they are in the position where they can play Raynor every turn or every other turn and they are out gaining what you can do and you don't have a way to win besides damage, which most things win through damage, then it's time to go. And I've definitely spent too many times just like letting things go longer than I should have. Because maybe I can impressively get past the 4th Raynor, but there's going to be a 5th and a 6th. Right. So like, why bother?
Yeah. I mean, if you can silence or steal the Arcanite defense crystals or the piece that comes out of the starport that gives them 7 armor when it's launched.
Mm-hmm. Well,
those are better to steal because like Raynor doesn't get like, it's tempting to wait to try to steal the starship, but which is, yes, it is more armor, but also it's the first one. And Raynor doesn't care if the starships have died. It only cares that they've been launched. So if you allow your opponent to launch a starship that has Arcanite defense crystals in it, that's going to be 6 or 12 armor every time they play Raynor, which is really hard to overcome after a while. So it is imperative, if you have a way to avoid it, and some decks don't, to try to make it so that the death rattle, that the Arcanite defense crystal does not die with text on the card.
Yeah. So if you have a hex or a deafen or a mind control tech.
Yeah, or it's early enough that you can coax Reska into taking it, like that. Those are all valid things that you can do. And I mean, like, I was beating them occasionally with the Zerg DK just because, like, you can sometimes get ahead of them. Like sometimes they'll just draw upside down, but also you can sometimes set it up such that you can steal the things that are in the way and just hit them for a lot of damage. But you need to get a lot of infestors, and you need to not just leave a naked infestor on board against that deck either, because if they hex it, then you're very far behind. So it's not generally like, you generally want to hit an infestor with a death growl, so like one hex doesn't wreck you. But just like, it's very tempting to just go like, okay, well, I'm just going to go Brilbone Buccaneer and infestor, and that's going to be enough. Then they hex it, and then you're sad. So be aware of that when you are playing against the Shaman. So
yeah, and that's true for either Shaman, because the fast one plays Thrall's Gift too.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think that's enough of the the prison deck. It's not exactly a prison deck. It does have win conditions, but the time loop deck.
Yeah.
I think Zaka was calling the actual prison Shaman Concede Shaman.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. We talked about that last week. We don't need to rehash. Yeah. But if you are more like me, and also I think this deck is less likely to get, like, we obviously don't know what when for balance patches yet. They haven't said anything about that yet. But if they touch something, it's probably more likely to be the Infinite Fizzle. Although it could be both. We don't know. But if you just want to hit things, Siege Tank Terran Shaman is the aggro one. It has a lot of the same cards. You're running the Terran package, but we got your Trusty Companion, your Gorgon Zormu, your Backstage Bouncer, Siege Tank, which is not in the other one. You've got one Horn of the Windlord, just because it's more damage, or in a pinch it clears something, except for not buffed Zergs, ever. Keep that in mind. No matter how much health they have now, they will always become a 3/3 plus, and you will never, ever kill them with the Horn of the Windlord. It's not actually as annoying as it sounds. I only had it come up once when I was playing this deck, but it is, and that was because I ordered myself wrong. So that was an oops emote for sure. But and you've got your Murloc Growthin and your Cactus Cutters. So basically, it's a classic recipe aggro deck. You are putting on the maximum pressure. You are using taunts mostly to force them to trade. Like, in general with aggro, we say, like, make them do the trades for you. But in this case, like, they do literally have to do the trades for you because, like, half your stuff has taunt. So you're making taunts, you're going face. You're protecting your board with the face-hitting AoE from, like, the missile pods or from the starship piece that does that so that you can keep going face. And then you have a lot of different types of burst damage to finish. You have Bloodlust, but you've also got the Siege Tank. You've also got just damage from the battle cruisers, like the Banshees, can just add up. And you got Horn and the Windlord. And then you can get the battle cruisers again with Jim Raynor. So you have lots of different ways to get burst. If you're running Grifta, so the VS list from today cut Grifta for Power Haywire Ziliax, which I can definitely see because, like, we're just trying to overrun them. I had lots of games that were over on, like, 5, 6, maybe 7, just because I did a little too much damage, and when they tried to stabilize, they were a little too low, so they died.
It's also a Hearthstone deck in 2025, so it's actually illegal to not have Ziliax in the meta list. But
Zaka just looks at it and goes, "There's no Ziliax. This is wrong." Yeah. So I was playing with Grifta. And, you can get burst from that as well, or steal, or heal once was helpful against a weapon rogue. Although, as I said before, generally versus a weapon rogue, you're just killing them first is the plan. Trusty Companion, we do have, compared to the, like, Menagerie we were playing before the mini set, you don't want to, like, Trusty on Gorgonzormu or on Turbulus because you won't get anything. But you do have, like, if you have 4 Murlocs between the Growthins and the Cactus Cutters, and then you have a lot of mechs because the Terran starship pieces are mechs.
So those are SCV.
Good. And so is SCV. So those are good targets for Trusty Companion. And you can even Trusty Companion a frog from Pop-Up Book, and it will draw you Backstage Bouncer, and Backstage Bouncer is amazing. So, I wrote, we definitely do have some refill staying power. I did have a game where I went to turn 15 and I almost won, but I needed my Raynor in that particular game, and he did not want to show up at all. He was in the very bottom 5
Just
cards.
like him, really. Never there when you need him.
But it is finite, unlike the last deck. So generally, things like taunts and hexes are speed bumps, but mostly it's a race, including, like, Zerg DKs. Like, you will not match their spike, but you are faster to get going than they are. And it takes them a minute to really ramp the Zerg up. And they don't really have taunt.
Yeah,
so,
they don't have taunt, they don't heal. And if you're like me, they sometimes, or like almost all the time, they don't draw Infestor on time. Like, I was becoming very talented at not drawing Infestor.
Speaking of your mulligan for this, so for the stats for Terran Shaman currently are a little tricky because the decks are close enough in cards run that I guess it's too difficult for the stat sites to separate them out in the overall archetype data, because it would be too hard to know for sure, like, what an opponent deck was. So I don't know if that'll stay true, but that appears to be what's happening right now. So the overall archetype data can look a little weird because it'll be like, oh, Warrior's 50%, but it's not. It is favored for Infinite Fizzle and unfavored for Aggro Siege Tank. So what I did for stats was look at the most popular lists with thousands of games since the mini set on HS Replay for Infinite Fizzle, and for the Siege Tank one. So for the Siege Tank one, in turn of the mulligan, you want to keep Starport, Turbulus, Growthin, and SCV. Makes sense. Situationally, you can keep Liftoff, is also a really good one, just because it gives you some draw and a still starts building up your battle cruiser. Trusty Companion is good if you have something to play it with. Gorgon Zormu, especially if you also have like a turn 1 or turn 2 play. And Missile Pod is kind of on the edge, but depending on what you're facing, might be a good thing to keep. Other stuff, mostly not. Although, as always, use your own judgment on when to do certain things in the mulligan. In terms of matchups, in general, we're really good versus like fast stuff. We're very good against weapon rogues, Zerg DK, hunters, including Grunter Hunter. That's another place where the overall archetype stats are misleading, because Grunter Hunter is by far the worst matchup for Infinite Fizzle. Like, by far. If you're seeing a bunch of Infinite Fizzle and it's making you really mad, just play Grunter Hunter.
Like, if you look at last 3 days, the Grunter Hunter win rate is insanely high because they were just farming the spurt of Infinite Fizzle decks. And if you look at the last day, it has evened out, right? It's still, I think, the top... I guess this is in top 1K, right? It's still the top deck in top 1K. But yeah, for a while it was just ridiculous, the win rate of Grunter Hunter. I think not entirely off that matchup, but a large part off that matchup.
It's like 30-70 for the Shaman. It's really bad for the Shaman. Yeah.
It's real tough. And like, Grunter Hunter's good against a fair number of other things as well.
Right. It's not a one-trick pony deck. The Siege Tank aggro Shaman, though, is like 60-40 into the Grunter Hunter. Maybe a little worse at higher ranks. Overall, the Siege Tank one does drop a little bit at higher ranks, but it's still quite good at higher ranks. So it's very good against that. It's good against the Zerg Discover Hunter. It's good against all Protoss decks, including Hero Power Druid. It's good against Elemental Mage, which is actually, in general, a good deck right now.
Yeah, Elemental Mage is like the opposite of Grunter. Well, not the opposite, but it's like, it's bad against the Fizzle deck, like quite bad, but eats so many other things.
Yeah. It's interesting that like the two Shaman decks here have somewhat opposite strengths and weaknesses. I mean, there's certain things that they're both good against, like they're both pretty good against rogues, although the aggro one is a lot better, like quite a bit better against the rogues. But the slower one does better against the slower grindy matchups because it can just outlast, it can go essentially infinite, whereas the aggro one can't. So our harder matchups are, the hardest one is Terran Warrior, but it's still like 40-60. Like, it's not terrible. And then we have Dungar Druid and Zerg Warlock are also unfavored. Not a ton, but they are unfavored. And it's kind of impossible to get exact data on the two Terran Shamans into each other. My guess would be the Infinite one is probably favored, but I definitely did defeat Infinite ones with the aggro one in my own way too small to draw conclusions from sample size. All I can say is it proves that it is definitely winnable. So the slower matchups you have to watch out for a little more, and just like really you are the beatdown, right, in the who's the beatdown question. So that's kind of your matchup spread. I didn't actually face a Dungar Druid, which is kind of remarkable because they're popular. But remember for a lot of these things, especially the slower things, your AoEs do go face through taunts. That last little bit of damage can absolutely come. Like, make sure that you check on your starship what went into it, see how much damage it's going to do. Sometimes launching is a matter of like, I just need that last bit of damage, and the launch is what's going to do it. And make sure that you pay attention to how much it's going to cost. SCV played on the same turn as you launch actually gains you a mana comparatively. Because like, say it costs 3, but then you play the SCV, now it costs 1, so that's a total of 2 to launch it, plus you get a 1/3.
Yeah. And also, like, you can roll spell damage totem into a pop-up book. That's sometimes relevant damage. Like, sometimes if you're just like a couple damage off, like, you might just want to spend 2 mana and see if you can roll a spell damage totem and see if that gets you there. Like, remember that that's a thing you can do. I mean, I think it's still been a thing for a year, right? But it's been a while, and sometimes people forget that spell damage totem can get you over the edge, or can, turn into a clear if you need one with Lightning Storm. That's also sometimes relevant.
Yeah. This is obviously not generally your plan A, but occasionally, if it's later in the game, you have the mana to spare, and it would really be nice if you had a spell damage totem. Just start with the hero power and find out if you have a spell damage totem, because 1/4 of the time, oh, you do. Great. They have a board full of 4 health minions. Now they don't.
Mhm.
So
25% of the time, it works every time.
Every once in a while, the hero power first to find out what you get is actually correct.
It can be better than that, too. If you already have totems on board, it could be as high as 50%. Or, 100% if you have all 4 totems on board, you're something's gone very wrong. But in that deck, but if you happen to somehow have 3 totems on board, then it's 100%. But your odds of rolling spell damage totem get better with every not spell damage totem that you have on board.
I had totally forgotten that, but that's a good point. Yeah, you don't double roll the same totem unless you already have all of them. So, yeah, that does potentially affect the calculus there. A lot of it is thinking about, like, when do you want to launch your battle cruiser? It really depends a lot on, like, what's in the battle cruiser. But when you're deciding, like, do I launch it? It's just like with everything else. It's like, is it tempo? Is it like clearing a board that would otherwise clear my board? Is it pushing damage face? If I wait 1 turn and I have, like, a lot of the deal 5 damage to a random enemy, maybe this turn that wouldn't be very effective, but next turn it'll hit face, hopefully. In general,
do you want more starships or bigger starships out of Raynor when you play it? Which also sometimes depends on the opponent. Like, if your opponent is very good at single target removal, or like you're against a DK and they haven't played Reska yet, then you may want to go wider than taller with the starships. That's another thing to consider. Like, because Raynor's going to launch. Do you want Raynor to launch 1 big starship, or do you want it to launch 3 starships? If you've gotten a bunch of medevacs into the 1 big starship, you may does it launch them in order, or is it random? Do you know?
So when you launch it manually, it for sure does the order in which they died in terms of the effects. When you launch with a Raynor, I thought it did, but I feel like when you shutter walk, sometimes it gets scrambled.
Oh.
That's not so relevant for this tempo one, but I've definitely seen off Raynor, it more likely is going to end up being mixed up.
Well, I'm also talking about, like, do the starships, does it launch the starships in the order that you launch them? Because there's 2 things, right? Does it launch the starships in the order that you launch them, and then it does do the pieces trigger in the order that they originally triggered when you play Raynor? And I don't know the answer to that because I haven't been paying attention to that, but that's probably a good thing to know also.
I think so. I'm not 100% sure on this, and I should have been paying more attention to it, but I think that the starships do launch in the order, because I mostly went for just more starship launches whenever they were cheap.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to launch a 5-cost starship, like, ever in this deck. But if it's 1 mana, I'll just launch it if it's good tempo, which if it's 1 mana, it probably is, even if there's just 2 things in it. Because Raynor's not my plan A necessarily. Like, my plan A is that they're already dead. Like, it was turn 6 and they bloodlusted.
That's your answer for everything, though.
That is my answer for everything. It does also, if you can see that you are playing for Raynor, then you might want to slow down a little bit. But I would say with the infinite one, you want to be a lot more judicious about when you launch.
Yeah.
And getting a really big one. For this one, you can, as long as you've gotten a couple discounts, gotten a couple things in there, it's going to be useful right now. Like, just go for it.
Well, and particularly if it's got medevacs.
Yeah, I think that's the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, where it's just like, well, I need the missile pod effect, and I'm getting some Marines, so here's a board, deal with it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in the infinite version, like, if you've gotten a bunch of medevacs early, you probably want to hold off as long as you can on launching that starship and have it be like one giant starship that you're just going to launch from Raynor repeatedly, because if you have a lot of smaller ones and you have a bunch of medevacs, and if the medevac goes off first, then those Marines are going to take up the spots that your other starships could be taking up. And so you may not get any more starships after that. You're just going to have a bunch of stupid Marines that you're cursing.
Right. Plus the board space is more at a premium, I think, in the Infinite, whereas in the aggro one, yeah, the Marines are great because there are more things to Bloodlust, and there are more things for them to clear, and there are more taunts to protect the stuff that's going face. And one thing to keep in mind is you're ordering when you launch. If you have little starship pieces that you can trade off and then launch this turn, you generally want to trade them off and then launch. Like, if you're going to be trading with anything, it should be the starship pieces, because then those do something after they've died, essentially. Other stuff, ideally, are not trading, unless maybe it's like, oh, I did LockCon, and then I played Grofin, and then I, like the Rusher from Grofin trades often. But other stuff should not be trading except for starship pieces, usually. One thing that can be a little bit tricky with weapon rogues is that they don't play very many minions. They do play the swarthy short sword shiner every time, but they don't play a lot of other minions. Sometimes something they get off stick up. So it can be a little tricky to get your starship minions to die. You don't always need them to. And they do have to clear them eventually. Also, it's a little tricky for your siege tanks, because
they're
they
never going to
have any minions, so they don't have any targets.
But pop-up book is something that you want for the one taunts against a weapon rogue, and so if you need to kill a Viking or a medevac or something, you can pop-up book your own starship piece, right? So you can launch it.
That's true. Yeah,
silly things like that.
There are things. So think about the use of your pop-up book. You can also, if you have the 0-1 taunts, they're really tempted to kill it for you with Fan of Knives. They might not necessarily, but because they do only have 1 health. That is one thing to keep in mind with the weapon rogue, though, is that they won't just always present you targets. Pretty much everyone else plays minions. I guess Grunter Hunter doesn't always play minions. So same thing would apply there. Just keeping that in mind. But yeah, there's not another. I guess the last thing I would say on this is even the decks that have lots of health gain, it's armor. So there's not a lot of reason to, it's mostly armor. There's not a lot of reason not to just do your damage when you have it, even if it's not lethal. Because even if they get more health, it's mostly armor. It's not like when they have a bunch of healing, and if you do your damage too early, they just heal it all back up, and you might as well not have done anything. That armor was still going to be there regardless. Or if they have none of that because they're a weapon rogue or a Grunter Hunter, then they're just close to dying. I had a coaching with Hat early on, and I said, I want to learn aggro. I don't know how to play aggro. I had just come back into the game, and I had never played aggro successfully. And he said, okay, well, think about the times when you lose to aggro. Why did you lose? Well, they just did a little too much damage, and I couldn't quite stabilize because I was just a little too low when I started to, and then I died. And he was like, yeah, do that.
Playing the deck explains the deck,
Yeah, if you've played other Shaman, if you've played other aggro decks, I think, what deck clicks with people always depends and can be hard to predict, but at least for me, this clicked pretty quickly. So, give it a try, especially if you're seeing the Grunter Hunters that are hunting the Infinite Fizzles. The only thing I probably wouldn't, if you're seeing tons of Terran Warrior, that's maybe a sign that this wouldn't be the ideal deck. But that's still, you can race them down some of the time.
It's also probably a sign that you should go to bed.
I did have a moment. I was playing yesterday. Yeah. I did have a moment yesterday. I'd been playing a bunch. I was feeling really good about it. I went 6-0. And then I went for a while even. And then I stopped after, it was a win, but I stopped after a game, and I checked in with myself, and my body was like, no, we are so done. Just off a cliff. Done. Don't play anymore or bad things will happen.
This is why you need to have a copy of Dragon Age so you can play that when you're done, and then have something with less stakes.
Yeah, instead I was trying to play The Sims, but that's how I ended up. Then the mods didn't work because I had a patch, and then I destroyed all the save files on my computer, except I didn't. They were just hiding. And that took a while. It was not as relaxing as I was hoping. Yeah. Any final thoughts?
No, I think that about covers it. Short episode.
We haven't finished yet. Don't jinx it.
Oh, okay.
Just a really long coin concedes.
Yeah. Well, we have many folks we'd like to thank. Check out our thanks section on the website at queenconcede.com, where you can also find our contact info, our show notes, and our Patreon information. You can monetarily support our show at patreon.com/coinconcede. Join us every week live by following us on Twitch at twitch.coinconcede.com. Join our community chats in our Discord at discord.coinconcede.com. And write into our email at coinconcede@gmail.com. Follow us on Blue Sky at coinconcede. And if you'd like some CC swag, head on over to our shop at shop.coinconcede.com. Coin Concedes.
I'm going to coin concede to Anthony, who plays at my LGS. I think I had mentioned, well, I know I mentioned his, he had a GoFundMe a couple months ago. I mentioned that he had a GoFundMe for for a new van to help him, get around. And he's been having a number of health problems, particularly with his kidneys. And he has not been at the game store for the last couple of weeks. And turns out he's in the hospital. So I'm hoping that whatever's going on, he's going to get better from, and he'll be back annihilating my stupid deck soon. But I was definitely worried when it was the second week in a row that I hadn't seen him, because he usually doesn't miss more than a week in a row. And then I found out, he's not doing so well. So I'm thinking of you, bud, and hopefully you're going to be back soon. So
I guess so.
First, I will coin concede to my husband for nagging me about fluids for the whole week, and just really doing a good job helping take care of me, making sure we had soup and other good food, and that I was getting sleep, and that just in general being a mensch. And then also coin concede to Leo, the designer, for some fun streams. And I put his Twitch at the top of the show notes, by the way, if you want to go give him a follow. He doesn't necessarily stream all the time, but when he does, it's quite fun. And he usually announces it on Blue Sky, if you want to see when that's happening.
Well, I feel like we do this every so often with some frequency, but gonna coin concede to our coachings for the month for being patient with us. I think,
yeah,
myself and both of you, it has been,
especially me.
Yeah, life stuff, but also United States stuff. We're just, our minds are not fully in gear. So thank you for your patience with those.
Yeah. But so that's going to do it for us. So until next week, keep calm and ship it. And if you see us on ladder, coin concede.
Coin concede.
Coin concede.
All life must end. I yield for now. I concede. Well fought. I concede.
You win this one.
The victory is yours.
You have bested him.
I give up.
You win this one, friend. You win this time. I choose death.